It seemed like a normal family home, but the horrors it held inside were unbelievable. January 14, 2018, California. A dispatcher picks up a call. 911 emergency, what are you reporting? On the other end is a frantic voice. I just ran away from home. I live in a family of 15. My 2 little sisters are chained up. The caller was 17-year-old Jordan, her hands shaking, her breathing heavy. She knew she didn't have much time. Her captors could already be on her trail. But where was she? She didn't know her own address. She couldn't even spell her own last name. She told the dispatcher, "I've never been outside. Please, please come quickly," she pleaded. It wouldn't be long until they realized she is missing. In a house just down the street was David Turpin, a computer engineer. He had never been arrested for a crime. To anyone looking, he was successful. He had the names Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman written on his resume. His family was wealthy, pillars of the community, so when he married Louise when she was just 16 years old, heads turned. When Louise met David, she was a teenage runaway. He was 23, but her own family gave their blessing. With an educated man like David, she was going up in the world. Well, that's how it seemed. God, they claimed, told them to have as many children as possible, and that's what they did, one after another, with God as their witness. Until 2010, the family lived near Fort Worth, Texas. Their house was down a dirt road, so few people communicated with them. The curtains always seemed to be drawn. Occasionally, someone would see them throwing stuff into a dumpster outside of the house, sometimes what looked like toys, but new ones. There were stacks of bicycles, all brand new, never used. They got rusty and then it was into the dumpster. Neighbors were confused. Why throw away expensive toys? Never in a million years could they have guessed what was going on. When the eldest of their children, Jennifer, turned 18, their parents took most of the children to a trailer deep on their large property. They took 2 infants with them and told the rest that they were to fend for themselves. Once a week, Louise would come around with food, but it was barely enough for so many children to survive. For sustenance, they ate ketchup and mustard or sucked on ice cubes. If they complained, Louise punished them severely. When they all lived together and David worked during the day, Louise ran the household with an iron fist. Food was locked in the fridge, the cupboards were locked too, and if the kids dared steal a cookie, they were put into dog kennels outside. For the children, this was just how life was. They didn't know any different because they had no communication with the outside world. If they ever left the house without permission, they were tied with ropes. One time, Louise hogtied one of them, but later decided that chains and padlocks were easier to work with. When imprisonment or violence didn't work, Louise traumatized them. One of the girls, just 9 at the time, stole some food from the pantry. Louise took her favorite kitten and made her watch as she threw the kitten to feral dogs. "Let this be a lesson," she said, as the young girl sobbed. This kind of psychological conditioning began as soon as the children could talk. Kept away from school, the only education they received, besides reading and writing, came from the Bible, passages from the Old Testament that warned of punishment for unruly children. Much of the time, they couldn't even play together. David and Louise confined them to their rooms. Play was outlawed. The fact was, the children were desperate to wash themselves. They were only allowed 1 shower a year. They stank, and that was especially hard on the girls as they grew into their sense of hygiene. They were filthy. Their bedrooms smelled awful. They had to ask permission to use the toilet, but since some of them were chained up, they often soiled themselves. The mattresses they slept on were yellowed, browned, and rancid smelling. One thing that they were allowed to do was write journals, notebooks that David and Louise read and studied, and that one day would become evidence. The writing was usually done at night. The sleeping hours of the Turpins were highly unusual. Bedtime was around 4 a.m., so they slept most of the day. If the children woke early, they dared not move. David and Louise purposely kept a smoke alarm malfunctioning so it beeped night and day, telling the children it was a security system. And anyway, with God watching, the children lived under 24/7 surveillance in their own minds. When the older ones grew up, they took care of the younger ones, which was how David and Louise were able to move their children into a trailer. Truth be told, they were sick and tired of being parents, and that was when they started experimenting. When Louise began replying to online ads, meeting strange men for sex, David dropping her off at hotels. David had grown up cloistered and privileged, but Louise, her childhood was far from perfect. In the house, she was the tyrant. Then one day in 2010, the family vanished from their Texas home. Repo men showed up and took their cars. The next family to move in was met with a shock. The house was a dump, garbage everywhere, rotten food left out. The bathroom floors had rotted through. The mattresses on the beds were unfit for humans. There was human feces on the floor of what looked like a small classroom, with religious textbooks scattered across the ground. The new couple found frightening Polaroid photographs, one showing a bed with a metal rail and a rope tied to it. They had to wade through mountains of filth, flies buzzing around the empty food tins. Somewhere in the trash heaps they heard a noise. 2 chihuahuas, bones protruding from their chest. Unlike the other abandoned dogs and cats which now lay dead in the filth, they had survived by eating feces from diapers. Wherever those children had gone, hell had followed them. 8 years later, Jordan sprinted from the house while the rest of the street slept. This was their new home in Paris, California, about 70 miles from Los Angeles. The dispatcher on the line needed to know where she was. Jordan gave her the address as 92570-5574. Those are just numbers, the dispatcher said. Jordan had no idea where she lived. When the dispatcher told her to find a street sign and wait on the sidewalk, Jordan's first thought was, what's a sidewalk? There were no sidewalks in the Bible, no pavement in hell. But she knew Paris, and the dispatcher could trace her location from her phone. Soon, Sheriff's Deputy Anthony Colas, at the end of a long night shift, drove toward the girl standing outside, her face terrified, her hands shaking, her body little more than a rack of bones. He knew it was her, and in a gentle voice he asked, "Hi, Jordan, what's going on?" The facts came out in frantic bursts. 15 people in her family, 13 children, and the oldest was 29, the youngest just 2. Only 3 were boys. 2 of her sisters, she said, were age 11 and 14 and chained inside of their bedrooms for stealing food. One of the boys in another room was also in serious trouble. Jordan's voice was manic as she rushed her words. She apologized. "I've never been alone with a person," she explained. In her 17 years of life, she had not once spoken to someone outside of her home, one-on-one. "Do you want to know why the kids stole food?" she asked. It was because they weren't being fed. All they were given was peanut butter sandwiches, not enough to keep them from being constantly famished. Colas, unsure of whether she was mentally unwell, asked, "Do you take medication?" "What's medication?" she replied. Her life of isolation had robbed her of even the most basic vocabulary. She had an old smartphone in her pocket, one that the kids could use to make phone calls. She showed Colas photos of urine-stained bedsheets, her sisters chained to the beds. "We don't take baths," she told him nervously. Her last full-body wash was a year ago. He's heard enough. He'd seen enough, and so he told her not to delete anything on the phone as he placed her in the safety of his squad car. "Do you have any injuries?" he asked, in case she needed a hospital. "What are injuries?" was the reply. Colas called for backup and kept asking questions. Jordan said the family was moving house, heading to Oklahoma. Her mom was stressed, threatening to chain all the kids up for weeks and let them sit in their filth. She was afraid that her mom had lost it and was going to kill them. By the time backup arrived, the sun was already rising. The officers banged on the door. Louise answered, nervously playing with her hair, dogs barking in the background. David was standing behind her in the entryway, the weak father and the domineering mother with mental problems. It was a toxic mix. Louise's breathing was labored as the deputies asked to look inside. "We're packing," she said. "It's a mess." The police didn't have a warrant, but this was a case of exigent circumstances. They walked right in. The house stank. Food waste covered the floors, empty soda bottles, mounds of boxes and tins. It was as if everything had been dumped wherever it was used. The smell of feces filled the officer's nostrils. There were piles and piles of boxes, children's toys, children's clothes, some half-opened, still new. In one of the bedrooms, 2 girls sat on a filthy mattress on the floor, their faces petrified. "Can I see your wrists?" one of the officers asks. The girls weren't chained, but perhaps the parents had released them before answering the door. As one officer investigated the house, another stayed with Louise and David near the entrance, keeping them there with small talk. He noticed David hadn't moved from his spot, and then he saw why. David was blocking an opening, a partition. "Sarge, we got another room." On the top bunk of a bed, a young boy lay completely still, his wrists and ankles chained to each end. The officers opened a closet and pulled out lengths of chain and padlocks, metal rattling in their hands. "Detain them," he told the other officers still standing at the door. It was David and Louise's turn to know what it's like to have your hands bound in metal. They were marched outside to a patrol car as Louise tried her best to sound innocent. I've never been in trouble. This is a first for me." It was almost as if she didn't know that she had done wrong. More officers arrived, all of them searching through mountains of trash and boxes, looking for keys so the boy could be freed. Eventually, the boy had his chains removed. All 13 children were taken straight to the hospital, but their story would prove more shocking than anyone could imagine. Half of the children in that house were between 18 and 29 years old. They were adults legally, but their minds were not like those of most young grown-ups. All of them suffered cognitive impairment and nerve damage from a lifetime of inadequate nutrition. Some could barely communicate. Tortured for years on end, they didn't fully understand right from wrong. Their growth had been stunted. Their bodies were childlike. The eldest weighed just 82 pounds. This wasn't because the household lacked food. There was more than enough to eat. Police found stacks of empty pizza boxes, paper bags and cartons from burger restaurants, large boxes of Krispy Kreme donuts, and evidence of pumpkin pies. The filthy rooms looked like a fast food repository. So why were the children starving? The answer was torture. David and Luis often ate food in front of them, watching as their children's mouths filled with saliva. Occasionally, they left pizzas out on the table, baiting the kids to steal. It was a trap. If they so much as touched the crust, they were grabbed and chained for disobedience. This kind of psychological torture had gone on for decades. Food was a weapon. So why were there so many partially opened toys? David and Luis would show the children the toys that they bought, but never allow them to play with them. They would say, "Look at this, how cute, how cool." But that was it. "Look, don't touch." The children were told that it was their own fault for being badly behaved. That's how all of those bicycles ended up outside their Texas home. They were bought, shown off, and never used. It broke the children's minds as well as their hearts. The dumpster outside the house was full of gifts never received. None of the children had more than a third-grade intelligence. David had filed documents with the state saying that he was running a school, but it was a complete lie. The kids didn't learn much at all. They didn't understand basic words or have any concept of how the world worked. They didn't understand geography, or that there had been 2 world wars, or that there was such a thing as Superman. Some didn't even know what the police were. The only time they'd ever learned anything was when on rare occasions David and Luis had allowed them outside. That was in Texas, where they would go to the creek to play. Other kids would ask them what their names were, but they didn't get an answer. David and Luis had told them to remain nameless, and then they banned the children from ever going anywhere. On the few occasions that they all went out together, like the times David and Luis renewed their marriage vows in Las Vegas, it was impossible to see these kids were the victim of lifelong torture. On Facebook, they all appeared happy as could be. The girls were all dressed in matching lilac and purple plaid dresses, the boys in suits, all smiling but terribly thin. The baby in the pink dress was the only child with excess fat. 3 times they renewed their vows: 2011, 2013, and 2015. Each time, an Elvis impersonator officiated. Sure, it was fun for the children. They didn't understand what was wrong with their existence, and they had been taught from early on that good children did what their parents told them. Mommy and Daddy were speaking through God. David and Luis filled their minds with parts of the Bible which they claimed were proof that being locked up with their parents was the right way to live. God was watching, and God punished bad children. They grew up with images in their minds of children's heads being dashed against rocks. They didn't know any different. After the truth came out, the younger children were sent to live with foster parents. Jennifer got married. She and Jordan spoke on television, but the others kept away from the glare of the public spotlight. The state let one of the children down. One of the youngest ones, a girl, forced to stand all day in the same place and given sleeping pills. Their parents and their biological daughter were convicted of numerous crimes: child endangerment, false imprisonment, neglect, and inappropriate touching. The world is full of bad people, but it's also full of good ones. The kids received hundreds of thousands of dollars from the public in donations. These days, the children share a bond that can never be broken, sharing jokes about a world no one else could ever understand. Recently, all 13 of them got together to attend a Justin Bieber concert. Bieber was a savior for Jordan. She used to sneak into a part of the house and secretly watch his videos. That's how she figured out her own childhood was not normal. Then Luis caught her and choked her senseless. "I thought I was going to die that day," Jordan later said. "After that whole day happened, I kept having nightmares that she was killing me." The parents pleaded guilty to 14 felony counts, including cruelty to an adult dependent, child cruelty, torture, and false imprisonment. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. Now go check out The Family Secret So Evil It Shocked Police, or click on this video instead.